The nature restoration law is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the EU to take action on the massive loss in biodiversity over the last few decades. The intention of the law is to restore damaged ecosystems to a healthy state in Ireland and across Europe, to attempt to stop the collapse of our wildlife and slow the progress of the climate crisis. The measure will cover at least 20% of the EU's lands and sea areas by 2030 and ultimately all ecosystems in need of restoration by 2050. But at this point in time, we don't know what the finalised law will look like or if it will be passed at all when it goes forward to a vote of all 705 MEPs on July 11th. If it is fatally undermined, I think there'll be plenty of blame to go around, because there has been an incredible amount of scaremongering with regards to its content, with the re-wetting of peatlands being the main point of tension. I can understand the confusion and the worry from many farmers that they have with regard to this law. Farmers deserve clarity and reassurance on the potential impact the process will have on their land and their livelihoods. And over the past few months, the law has been through several committees in the European Parliament, with roughly 2,500 amendments being proposed. So I think there's no wonder that people are trying to keep up with the progress and are really unclear now at this point as to what's going on. But this confusion has been made so much worse by the spread of misinformation by politicians within the process, and that's by politicians who I think should know better. The most serious opposition has come from the EPP, and that's the grouping that Fine Gael calls home in the European Parliament. They led the effort to block the bill at committee stage. It's really concerning, I think, to see centre-right parties, including Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, move to the right on climate issues in the European Parliament. Unfortunately, they're not alone in taking an environmental stance. Sinn Féin's Chris McManus voted against one of the most important pieces of EU legislation in its history at the Agriculture Committee. He said there was too much ambiguity about the impact that the law would have on farmers. A question that I keep coming back to is, why are MEPs from government parties fighting against measures proposed by the Nature Restoration Law while simultaneously backing their own climate action plan? Because that's a plan that's more ambitious on targets on biodiversity than the ones that they're railing against at the EU. The coalition parties appear to be at odds with each other on the issue. You yourself, Minister, have said that the nature restoration is happening. The Taoiseach believes that it goes too far. And it's not clear, I suppose, on the whole, just where the government really stands on this as a whole. It's important to look at some of the facts. I think the need for far-reaching climate action simply could not be more urgent. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's recent assessment report shows a temperature rise of 1.1 degrees. This has resulted in more frequent and hazardous weather events and increasing destruction of our planet. To date, we have not done a fraction of what's required. Ireland's emissions are going up, not down. If we continue our current path, it will result in the absolute unthinkable. The scale of biodiversity damage is frightening. Figures from the National Parks and Wildlife Service show that 91% of protected habitats are in poor or inadequate condition, and more than 50% are declining, according to the EPA. Half of our rivers, lakes and coastal waters are ecologically substandard, with 18.5% of monitored rivers severely polluted. The recommendations from the Citizen Assembly on biodiversity loss are unequivocal. It urges the state to take prompt, decisive and urgent action to address biodiversity loss and restoration. It also seeks leadership in protecting Ireland's biodiversity for future generations. On the Nature Restoration Law, such leadership has sadly been lacking in many parties. The Nature Restoration Law is a direct response to the climate and biodiversity crisis. The proposal acknowledges that certain groups, such as farmers, will be impacted more than others, and consequently, national and EU funding is proposed as part of its implementation. Many of the fears surrounding the law are unfounded. The government's own climate action plan commits to peatland restoration. In fact, the Minister has already pointed out that commitments on re-wetting peatland can be met on state-owned land. And it is absolutely vital that those commitments are met. When these bogs were in their natural condition, the carbon within the bog was contained. Once they were drained, that same carbon they once stored was released into the atmosphere. According to the International Peatland Society, Ireland's peatlands are estimated to emit the equivalent to around 8.4 million tonnes of carbon dioxide every year. Bringing these bogs back to a state where they can once again store carbon is absolutely essential in meeting our climate targets and restoring the native biodiversity that used to flourish on these lands. The targets are relatively modest. The 2030 targets under the law are less than the Coalition's own targets and lower than the targets set out in the Department of Agriculture's Acclimatised programme. It's astounding to me that we're here today debating over targets that are less than the ones that we've already set here in Ireland. Ones which have been set by some of the very parties who are arguing so strongly against them in Europe. This narrative being created around re-wetting proposals in the bill, the government will CPO private farms and it will destroy farmland, isn't backed up by any fact. In fact, the nature restoration law has the potential to be transformative. It would provide new funding streams for farmers to ensure the viability of farming long into the future. Because I think it's really important to be clear about this. There is no future for farming unless we protect our ecosystems and our biodiversity. Comments from elected representatives about how any kind of climate action is bad for Irish agriculture and is irresponsible and all of these things, that narrative results in the people and the communities who will be most affected by climate change actually being the most reluctant then to take climate action. And when these conversations happen, I think you'd swear that farming communities have nothing at stake in relation to climate action, but the opposite is true. They arguably have the most to lose from extreme weather events and from biodiversity loss. Most people agree on the need for substantial action to address the climate and biodiversity crisis, including so many farmers that I speak to. So I find it deeply frustrating when this discussion pits farmer against farmer and farmers against environmentalists. It presumes that farmers, I don't know, either don't care or perhaps don't understand the impact of climate change. And this is insulting to farming communities, and it is also simply untrue. Finally, I have to ask the TDs in this chamber who are opposing the nature restoration, I have to ask you this: what is your plan for the agriculture sector if we fail to take climate action? Where do you see the future of the industry if we keep letting emissions rise and allow soil degradation to continue alongside more and more and more biodiversity loss? Our planet is facing an existential crisis. The debate on climate change and biodiversity loss deserves nothing less than honesty, at least from our politicians.